Mike Post had a problem.
The rhythm section doesn't read, and the orchestra doesn't jam.
Think about that for a second. One world in music lives in the pocket, the other lives in the score. Trying to fuse them means that some poor guy has to score a pocket. It's impossible. That is, unless you're Mike Post. Last episode, I sat down with Mike to talk through the TV themes he wrote, which have shaped the last half century of television. The Rockford Files, Hill Street Blues, Magnum PI, NYPD Blue, and of course, Law and Order. And that's not even all of them. But if you want to hear those stories, including the Wrecking Crew years and the iconic theme he wrote while walking past his piano in a towel because the inspiration just couldn't wait, go listen to that episode first. But today is about how Mike Post did the impossible. He scored a pocket. To do so, he got the best of the best. He got John Williams' orchestra, a 5-piece bluegrass rhythm section featuring Jerry Douglas and Gabe Witcher, and a blues band anchored by Eric Gales and Sonny Landreth. And then there's Mike, 81 years old, still curious, trying to see if he can make these worlds fit together, even though by every rule of music they shouldn't. This is the story behind Message from the Mountains and Echoes of the Delta. Two sides of the same album that don't quite feel like nostalgia, don't quite feel like TV, and don't feel like anything he's ever done before. They feel like a 5-time Grammy winner who still wakes up curious about what music has to offer. I'm Vonn Vanier. He's Mike Post. You're listening to Beyond the Notes. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It very much makes sense with your new album and the two pieces on that message from the mountains and echoes from of the Delta. So you mix like blues and bluegrass and like orchestral classical there, and it melds in such a sort of unique and interesting way where you have this orchestration that blends those styles into one sound. In other interviews, you've said you just decided one day that you want to challenge yourself and do something new other than TV stuff, which you'd been doing for so long. So like, is that actually how it happened? Did you just like wake up one day and immediately decide you wanted to do this, or is it like something more spread out over time and you're thinking about it?
It was It was 1 second in time. I'm driving down to it was COVID, so my shows were on the beach. Nobody's working. Right. Okay. Well, I can play more golf. I can go to the gym more. I can, hang out with my grandkids, and I can do this. I can travel more. I can go flying more. All right. I'm driving, and it's a Tesla, so it's driving itself pretty much, and it's at night, and I'm listening to some really cool bluegrass stuff. And Spotify's, the algorithm's kind of cool. It takes people that tend to listen to the same artists and the same stuff, and it widens your horizons, right? So it's playing me stuff I hadn't really heard, and I'm going, oh, listen to that. Gee, that's great. Wow, I got to listen to that whole album and blah, blah, blah. And it's just an idea. And I thought, I wonder if has anybody ever written a bluegrass big piece for orchestra and a 5-piece bluegrass rhythm section? And I kind of knew the answer. I thought I knew the answer. Yeah, nothing. I don't think anybody's done that. And okay, I right away, I'm smart enough to know that there's many hurdles, but the first giant hurdle is the rhythm section doesn't read and the orchestra doesn't jam. Okay, wait a minute, okay, we got to figure that one. Well, I'm the guy that did classical gas at 23, okay, and all classical gas was a really cool little A minor, fairly simple, classically oriented guitar piece that Mason Williams wrote that I listened to and was producing his album. And I said, I've been working on this idea of orchestrated rock and roll. And he goes, huh, what? And I said, yeah, we need a big orchestra for some of your vocals. Why don't I do that thing, And He said, "Well, whatever you want to try." Well, so, it stars, right? And then I got the idea to go. So that's really my composition. I never got credit for it and didn't ask for it, and he didn't offer it. But it was an adventure into the idea of rhythm section licks in the orchestra, right? Now, Jimmy Webb was doing the same thing at the same time, but really we were probably two of the first guys to do it. Obviously, Jeff Lynne at ELO and a lot of other guys did it. It wasn't an invention. It was just putting two things that weren't usually coexisting together. When I had this question about, I wonder if anybody's done that with bluegrass music, and I knew the answer was no, then I started thinking, well, how would you do that? How can you do that? And I thought, well, if anybody can do it, I can do it. I know how to do that because I know what I'm doing. I'm authentic in bluegrass music. I know the difference between Flatt and Scruggs and Bill Monroe. I absolutely know the difference, and I'm a fan, and I can't get enough of it. I still listen to the Foggy Mountain Breakdown album a lot. I I know pretty much everything Jerry Douglas has ever done. I mean, I can't play it like he can, but and I know the difference between Joss Graves and Jerry Douglas. And so yeah, and I know people. I know bluegrass players. So I thought, okay, so that's the way it started, and it started with just little chunks. I just wrote little tunes, and then I thought, well, okay, I need to connect the tunes. I need to, and then it became, is this going to be a 10-minute piece? It's going to be a 15. And then it became a 30-minute piece. So, okay, you got to call that a concerto. That's what it is.
So, you talk about, how that uh, that the first piece, "Message from the Mountains," it feels, as it became more and more Americana, it reminded you of like, how special this country is, and how immigrants from all over the world have risked their lives and everything to come to the US. So I'm really curious about like how why did you decide to like explicitly put that narrative at the start of the piece, and how that came to be for you?
It was really like, playing the blues. It's like you start at one place and it just kind of, other people respond to what you did. And, it's like, oh, and now the thing grows on its own. It grows like grass or like trees or whatever, flowers. And so, the more I wrote and the more I put it together and realized it in MIDI and mocked it up, and then had bluegrass players come in and play. And it was during COVID, so we couldn't just do it all at once anyway, so I was doing it. It lent itself to growing because we had time to let things bounce off of each other. And, you know, working with John O'Hara, who's at the time was my full-time sequencing guy, wonderful composer, really talented young man, really good. And so I said, hey, John, get involved in this as a composer, not just as a synthestrator, sampleistrator, or orchestrator. So he added stuff to it too that was great. And really, it struck me that, okay, it wasn't, it wasn't sitting alone. It was really informed by the New World Symphony, really informed by Copland, really informed by Randy Newman, by that whole Americana kind of, how that kind of music, how, how, how how Foster's music, sounded in the late 1800s, and then how much it influenced contemporary music, how, how that whole thing grew in our country. And it just made me feel, especially, you know, with the political environment of how did the word immigrant become a bad word? I mean, I just don't get it. I'm just sorry to go off on that, but I mean, I don't understand. I mean, that's what America is, a bunch of immigrants. That's who we are. And so, I thought, wow, look at how much, look what's happened here. And I had a friend that was a TV showrunner, great guy, and I played it to him. I said, "What do you think of this?" He said, "God, I really love this music. It's fantastic." I said, "I've got an idea. What about if there was a spoken word, a recitation that started the thing?" And so he wrote that, and it was great. And then getting Amy Keys to recite it was wonderful. Just that's how that.
Yeah, you mentioned Amy Keys, and you have all these other amazing people who worked with you on it, like Eric Gales and just a bunch of other incredible musicians and Herb Peterson. Like, do you have any stories of like the recording process with them and what that was like for you, and just any like fun things?
Yes. First of all, yeah, to involve people like Abe Jr. and Abe Sr., Laboriel, people of that caliber, and Herb Peterson and Gabe Witcher, give me a break. I mean, so you're talking about monsters, Mike Witcher. You're just talking about guys that are great at their job. And the bluegrass pieces, who- Patrick Sarver came in with Herb and with Gabe, and they played pretty live. Okay. And so I was the beneficiary of, okay, I sent him little pieces, and I played the melody that I was thinking of. Here's where you start. You're not confined to this. They don't read anyway. I mean, Gabe Wisher reads, but the other guys don't read. I, so here's where to start. Here are the chord changes. Here's what I'm thinking the melody is. And was a beneficiary of their jamming, of their inspiration, because they didn't stick with exactly what I did. They improved upon it. Then I took it and changed the orchestration to reflect what they had played. And then, and a few times I had them come back in and play again because I changed the orchestration. Then they went, oh man, it's going there. So it was a little bit like the conversation that takes place in any rhythm section, in any jam situation where, what were you thinking when you played that, Mike? Well, not a thing, because I was just listening to what that guy was playing, and it just happened that I played it that way, So so there was a jam element, even though it was done in pieces, and even though it was done at separate times. It, I know enough, and I've been a rock and roll guy my whole life, which is the definition of what we're talking about. Um, you know, so that's the main thing. Was every time somebody either played something here in my studio or sent me something, when Sonny Landers sent stuff back, when it was just, are you fucking kidding? You actually played that shit? I mean, I never, I thought it was going to be great. I didn't know it was going to be that. I was like, God, it just knocked me out so much. Well, then I reflected it in the writing and in the orchestration and the orchestra part of it. So, that was the main thing that took place there, was the conversation between them and me and the orchestra. And then, as experienced as I am, with a baton in my hand, standing in front of a big orchestra. When I went to Sony after COVID broke and I could put a big orchestra together, that process was fantastic because it was the next generation of studio people after me. And I told him, I said, "Hey, I'm your uncle or your grandfather or your dad or whatever the hell I am." And I was this is my opening speech. I said, "I'm banking on something from you because in my experience with the orchestra for all those years since the annual since classical gas, it was always a struggle to get them to play in time with a rhythm section because the rhythm section is the cornerstone of good time if it's a good rhythm section. And the orchestra, that's not natural for them to groove. They don't have a pocket necessarily. The music they're playing is complex. It's hard to play, usually. It takes a lot of rehearsal. And the rhythm section can rehearse. What the fuck? We don't need to rehearse. Let's play. I mean, let's play. This, so much of what we do is about the feel, right? And so much of what they do is about the rehearsal and the technicality of the music, right? So I said, because you guys are younger than me, I'm banking that you've heard a lot of stuff that my big brothers and my uncles and my fathers that I conducted with before, that you've improved on it because you've heard the melding of it for most of your lives, from the Beatles, from everybody that was doing the same stuff I was doing, putting the orchestra with the rhythm section. And man, when I dropped the downbeat, it was awesome. I turned to that string section and I went, okay, that was everything I could. I couldn't have dreamt it that good. How can you play that well? This is actually pretty hard. And they just looked at me like, yeah, not hard to us. And it was like gunfighters, it was just like the Wrecking Crew. It's like, okay, what do you want? What do you need? Let me give you what you ought to have. Here, I'll play it. That was this happened with that orchestra over 2 days, and it was jaw dropping. And also the fact that we recorded it in MIDI and could move it around and could perfect it and put it with what we'd done with samples and make it just giant. It's technology, colliding with a lot of experience and a lot of talent aside from whatever talent I have. John O'Hara and Andy Berkheimer and Dennis Sands, one of the greatest mixers of all time for orchestral scores. Those guys they just help me realize what that orchestra played, and it was extraordinary to me.
I mean, just hearing it, you can feel the energy and the magic of it. So I can tell that in that room there must have been a lot of that. Okay, so one final question just to wrap us up, because I have to ask. You're the law and order man. When you meet law enforcement or lawyers or anyone, they hear you wrote that theme. Is do they ever? What's that like? Does that ever happen for you?
Yeah. Yeah, it got me out of 2 tickets.
Wow. Uh-huh.
So it got me out of 2
Really?
traffic tickets.
Uh-huh.
And
Th
I think one of the coolest things that ever happened to me, and I got a letter one time from a widow of an officer that was killed in the line of duty. And it was right after Hill Street was a hit record, with my name on it, right? And she wrote me this letter, and she's, it was after a year of mourning, and she said, that piece of music got me through that year, without, you know, it gave me some hope, and it gave me, I was able to get some of the grieving out and cry, and it was a beautifully written letter by her. And of course I knew what she meant because all the music that's so important to me that I certainly didn't write, that has comforted me, that has accompanied me, that I remember where I was when I first heard such and such, and just the way that you do and every one of us do, right? And even the civilians, they're it's not just the guys in the band. The civilians are moved by this art form, and they know where they were, who they were with when they first heard something that's important to them. And for that woman to write me and say that something little piece of music I wrote meant something to her in desperate times like that. That really moved me. And I've had, I've had people in law enforcement say, you know, yeah, man, the middle section of NYPD Blue, you got that right. Yep, yep. We're all Irish at heart, you know. So, at any rate, to be honest with you, it most of the time if I ever watch any of my shows on TV, which I don't very often because I've done them already, right? And have to watch every, but if I see something, I'll be walking through someplace and Law and Order is always on somewhere, and and I've done every episode. It isn't like I just wrote the theme and bailed. Every note of every episode, except for the source music, coming from some piano bar, or that's me. And it's amazing that it's gone on this long, and that Dick still likes it. Dick Wolf still likes what I do. So, and I'm not bored. I'm not overdoing Law and Order. So it's ongoing. In fact, when I hang up from you, I'm going to go have a salad for lunch and go in and finish up a Law and Order that I started this morning. So, it's the gift that keeps giving.
Yeah. Well, again, for me, absolutely incredibly inspiring. Just to hear about your experience and your journey, just for me as a composer as well. And so I'm very grateful that you were able to join us today.
Well, thank you for having me, Vaughn. I appreciate it. I want to wish you the best of life, and I'll leave you with something to think about, because I say this to guys, to people your age. The great thing about music, it doesn't care where you're from. It doesn't care what your education is. Doesn't care what color your skin is. Doesn't care what God you pray to. Doesn't care who you sleep with. Doesn't care who you vote for. I have an equation for making a living and having a life in music. And the equation is innate talent and hard work decide if, and luck and timing decide when and how big. So if you have some talent and you work really hard at it, because it's not work, it's obsession, and you can stay positive long enough and stay away from the pitfalls, stay away from the stuff that takes you away from the music, your ego, drugs, alcohol, your ego. Did I say that? Your ego. If you can get outside of it and listen to people that are geometrically better than you and aspire to that, then oh, wait a minute, the gears are going to mesh sometime. Your number's going to come up sometime. You're going to get a shot, and it's going to work, and you're going to find a life in music. I don't know how big, and I don't know when, but I can already tell you're in the band because you're going to all this trouble while you're still getting an education to do this work and to talk to idiots like me. You're already in the band. You'll do okay.
I hope so.
Me too.
Well, thank you again. Again, very inspiring and a wonderful time. So thank you so much for being on today.